Good morning. Today we are solving rational equations. This is part 3. Today we'll be solving using the least common denominator method. This is TEKS from Algebra 2, 2A.6I. So for problem number 1, we're going to solve by finding the least common denominator first. Okay? And we're actually going to multiply the whole equation by the least common denominator. For these first 2 questions, I'm going to write the work very, very detailed. And then I'm actually going to skip one of the steps on the next problem, okay? So the first rule is to look at our denominators and to see what our least common denominator is. We have an x, a 4, and an x. What is my least common denominator? 4x, okay? So I'm going to multiply the whole equation times 4x. So I'm going to actually multiply here, here, and here. So when I multiply, I'm going to put it next to my numerator. Plus 7 times 4x over 4 equals, and that negative 9, I'm going to put that negative on top with the 9. Okay? So then the next step is to look for common terms in the numerator and denominator. What would we cross out because they divide to 1? So in the first fraction, the x's, we can cross them out because they divide by 1. Now I know before it made it seem like we could not cross off if there was a plus or minus sign. So there's no plus or minus sign here. Since we're multiplying, we can cross them off. The second fraction, the 4's can cross off. And the third fraction, the x's can cross off. So the whole purpose of doing this method is that all of my denominators are going to be gone. So on my first fraction, I have 5 times 4. That leaves me with 20. The second one is 7 times x. And the third one is negative 9 times 4. So again, this process is going to get rid of the denominators. Okay, so my next step is to get the x by itself. I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides. And I get 7x equals negative 56. I now divide by 7, and my answer is x equals negative 8. Now we check. We check if that number was any kind of domain restriction, a whole. So we're looking at asymptotes, wholes, basically it's a discontinuity, okay? So if I plugged in a negative 8 there, does it make anything false? No, so that is my answer, okay? It's not extraneous. My second fraction. What is my least common denominator? Well, the denominator is 1, so I don't have anything. So what I have is an x minus 5 and an x. So my least common denominator is x minus 5 and x. The other thing I want us to look for is this minus sign is going to go with the 8. So I'm going to go ahead and put the minus up here and change this to a plus. So we said our least common denominator was x minus 5 and x. So I'm going to distribute all of that here, here, and here. Now, I'm going to actually skip this step from number 1. Okay? Here's the reason I'm going to skip that. So I showed the work of what it means, but as you can see, something is always going to cross out. So I already want to look at what is going to cross out because I already have it on the denominator. And if I already have it on the denominator, I'm not going to write it on the numerator. So when I distribute that to the first number, I have x minus 5 times x because it's a 1. When I multiply to the second one, I had a plus negative 8. And what's going to cross out there? Well, I already have an x minus 5 on the bottom. So the x minus 5 would actually cross out on the second one. And so I'm going to only have the x left. When I multiply to this third one right here, the x's would cross out, and I'm left with 3 times x minus 5. Let me repeat what I did there. I distributed the x minus 5 and x because that was my least common denominator. I distributed it to all 3 terms. I did not show the work of distributing it like I did right here. You see I put the 4x here, here, and here. I didn't do that. But I already thought when I distribute this here, I know this x minus 5 is going to cross out that x minus 5. So all I had left was the x times negative 8. When I distributed to the third one, I already knew that this x was going to cross out with that x. And all I have left is the 3 times x minus 5. So now I'm going to distribute into my parentheses. And this x, I'm going to go ahead and work backwards. I have x squared minus 5x minus 8x equals 3x minus 15. The next goal is to combine like terms and move everything to one side. So on my left side, I have x squared minus 13x equals 3x minus 15. Now, how do I move that 3x minus 15 over? Well, I'm going to subtract 3x, and then I'm going to add 15, and I'm going to put add 15. There's actually nowhere to put it under, so I apologize, it got a little bit crowded there. Okay, so combine your numbers. We have x squared minus 16x plus 15 equals 0. So now we're going to factor. What two numbers are going to multiply to AC but give me B? So what two numbers multiply to 15? 1 and 15, 3 and 5. Well, how do I get a 16 out of that? 1 and 15. And my signs are both negative. Okay. Set each factor equal to 0. X minus 1 equals 0. X minus 15 equals 0. So x equals 1. And x equals 15. And I look for any discontinuities, which means I plug those numbers back in. And I check if my denominators would be 0. And both of those solutions work. Okay, let's follow the same system again. Okay. So we'll take things slow. Let's look at our denominators. What is the least common denominator if I have an x, a 5, and an x? My least common denominator is 5x. So I'm going to distribute that 5x here, here, and here. So let's think about this. When I distribute this here, what's going to cross out? What am I going to have on the numerator and denominator? The x's. So I'm not going to write the x's on the numerator or denominator. So what I have left is the 15 that was already there times the 5. When I distribute to the second fraction, so this 5x, I'm going to multiply it here. So what's going to cross out? The 5's. So all I have left is x times 4. X times 4 is 4x. When I distribute to the third term, 5x times 7 over x. What's going to divide to 1? What am I going to cross out? The x's. So all I have left is the 7 that was there and this 5. So I have the 7 and the 5 left because the x is crossed out. Now let's go ahead and solve for x. 15 times 5. Bring down the 4x. 7 times 5. Okay. How am I going to get x by itself? Subtract 75. 4x equals negative 40. Next step is divide by 4. My answer is x equals negative 10. And I go and plug that back in. And I visually do it. I plug it in and I see if it caused any discontinuity. Basically, my denominators, when you have them equal to 0? No, it did not. So my answer does check out. Okay, let's try it again. Now we're going to get a little bit harder. Let's look at our denominators. This time I have an x plus 1 and I have a 2x and a 2x. What are my different things on my denominator? What is my least common denominator? A 2x and the x plus 1. Also, don't forget, when you have a minus sign, I like to think about the minus sign on the numerator and change it to a plus sign. So I'm going to multiply this whole thing by a 2x and an x plus 1. I'm going to distribute this to 3 places. The first one, the second one, and the third one. So when I multiply this here, that's on the top, that's on the bottom. I'm going to cross off the x plus 1's. So all I have left is the 3x that was there, and now the 2x. When I distribute this to this one right here, the 2x is going to cross out the 2x. All I'm left with is the negative 5 that was there and this x plus 1. So the negative 5 that was there and the x plus 1. When I distribute this to this third one, the 2x's and the 2x are going to cross off. All I'm left with is 3 and x plus 1. Let's go ahead and distribute. 3x times 2x is going to be 6x squared. Minus 5x minus 5 is equal to 3x plus 3. Combine like terms, move everything to one side. Minus 3x minus 3x minus 3 minus 3. 6x squared minus 8x minus 8. Woo! So the next step, we think about factoring. Here's a little bit of an issue, is that we need to look for greatest common factor. And guys, if I divide by greatest common factor, if it's just a number, honestly, I can just take it out. So we're going to divide everything by 2. So divide by 2 everything. Remember, as long as I do it to both sides of the equation, that's fine. So I'm left with 3x squared minus 4x minus 4. We haven't done factor by grouping in a while. Everything we've done, A has been 1. Well, this problem, A is not 1. So we are going to find our factors of AC whose sum is B, but then I'm going to have to do grouping. Okay, so it's been a while since we've done this. What multiplies to A times C? So 3 times 4 is a negative 12, but they have to add together to negative 4. So what multiplies to negative 12 but adds to negative 4? Let's look at my factors. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay. Now, because it's negative, one of them has to be negative. Which one's negative? How do I get a negative 4? 2 minus 6 would give me negative 4. Guys, those numbers do not go into my parentheses because A is not 1. Okay? So we're going to put those numbers in place of B. So we're going to bring down our A. And now instead of putting negative 4x, I'm going to put plus 2x minus 6x minus 4 equals 0. Then I'm going to group the first 2 in parentheses, group the second 2 in parentheses, and I'm going to put a plus sign in between, okay, because I'm not multiplying these 2 parentheses. Now, in each of these parentheses, I need to factor out a greatest common factor. So in my first parentheses, what can I factor out? An x. And the second one, what can I factor out? negative 2. So greatest common factor, what can I factor out? And I'm going to write that number in the front. When I factor out an x, I'm left with 3x plus 2. On the second one, when I factor out a negative 2, I am also left with 3x plus 2. My parentheses are the same, and if my parentheses are the same, I'm going to group the first two in parentheses. And my common binomial is my other factor. Again, this is called factor by grouping, and I had to do it this way because a was not 1. Set each factor equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0. X equals 2. The second one, 3x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 2 from both sides. Divide by 3. X equals negative 2/3. And I look at my original equation and I check if there was any discontinuities, which means was there any holes or asymptotes, and the answer was no, both of those solutions work. Okay, we have one more question. So I'm going to take this slow. Let's see if you can do this one almost by yourself. Okay, so first I look at my denominators. What is my least common denominator? Well, before I actually do that, I need to factor this out. X squared minus 1 is a difference of squares. Can I take the square root of both of them? And if it's a minus sign, this factors to x plus 1, x minus 1. So now my denominators are x plus 1, x plus 1, x minus 1. And what's underneath the 3 that I don't see? A 1. So I don't need to count that. What is my least common denominator? What are the different factors on my denominators? X plus 1, x minus 1. So now I'm going to distribute my least common denominator. So when I distribute it here, what's going to cross out? The x plus 1 and the x plus 1. So all I have left is these two. When I distribute it to the second one, what's going to cross out? Everything. Okay, x plus 1 is going to divide by x plus 1. X minus 1 is going to divide by x minus 1. All I have left is a 12. And when I distribute to the third one, when I distribute over here, is there anything on the denominator? There's not. So I actually need to bring over everything from over there over here. So can you see why I gave us a whole screen to work out this problem? I have double distribution here and double distribution here. It is a lot for one problem. So give yourself space. Think about it in each little step. So we're going to start, just think about this as one problem right here. Let's do double distribution, or let's do FOIL. Okay, so FOIL is take the first term and multiply it times the first term. So 4x times x is 4x squared. O stands for outside. Outside means the two outside terms. So 4x times negative 1 is negative 4x. Inside terms, 1 times x. What's 1 times x? 1x. Now we do 1 times negative 1. We get negative 1. Equals 12 plus... Ooh, I have double distribution and I have a 3 on the outside. So there's two ways to do this. I'm going to actually distribute the 3 here and here and then do double distribution. So when I distribute the 3 here and here, I'm going to have a 3x plus 3. And that's going to be multiplied times x minus 1. So if I do FOIL, first, outside, inside, last, take the first term, distribute it here. Take the first term, distribute it here. So 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 1 is negative 3x. Now we distribute the second term into it. So 3 times x is positive 3x. And 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. So it's a lot of terms. We are going to combine like terms and move everything to one side. So when I combine like terms, these two, negative 3x plus 3x are gone. And I'm going to combine these two right here. So I have 4x squared minus 3x minus 1 equals 12 minus 3 is also common terms. So I have 3x squared plus 9. Now move everything to one side. Okay, so I can cross that out here. Subtract the 9, subtract the 9. So I can cross it out right here. I'm left with x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. Okay, with all that, the good news is a is 1. Okay, so when a is 1, factors of AC whose sum is b get to go right into my parentheses. So what numbers multiply to 10 but can somehow give me a 3? Okay, 2 and 5. Now it's a negative 10, so one of them has to be negative. How can I add these together to give me a negative 3? 2 minus 5. Now again, because a is 1, I do not have to do the factor by grouping steps. These already go into my parentheses. Set each one equal to 0. X plus 2 equals 0. X equals negative 2. X minus 5 equals 0. X equals 5. I always look at my questions and I look at my denominators to see where my asymptotes or my wholes were, and neither one of these were asymptotes or wholes, so these are my solutions. Oh, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it helped you. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I will be posting more educational videos. Have a great day.